Most people are probably wondering why I'm over here. It's because we're going through just about every device possible. We have three great guests with us to talk about the California House races and just what we're seeing across Central California. And I want to start with Tim Rosales. We've been seeing these races certainly favor Republicans right now, maybe about 210, 195 as far as the overall House total. Republicans have already won the Senate. The former president will be the president-elect. Why is the House running through California? And can you talk about some of these undecided races right now?
Sure, there are several races in California throughout the state that are swing districts for the House. Could go either Democrat or Republican. And right now, all of them are extraordinarily close. I would anticipate that as ballots come in, those ballots will lean a little bit more favorable to the Democrats. And I would expect them to pick up a couple seats here in California, but they really need to sweep all of them in order to take control of the House. So I'd anticipate that the Republicans will still maintain a slim majority in the House, and that will be a challenge going into the next 2 years for Speaker Johnson.
And then let's go up to what we're looking at in Stockton. We have the Stockton man himself with us, Keith Smith. Can you talk to us about this Harder-Lincoln race? It was maybe something not too many people had their eyes on, especially those of us in the southern portion of the Central Valley. We're always looking at Salas and Valadeo and perhaps Caramar and Costa, and then also, of course, Duarte and Gray. What's been so surprising about the Harder-Lincoln district?
So it's a district that, based on past voting and then also party registration, most people consider to be relatively safe for whomever the Democrat who's running. And since Harder is an incumbent Democrat, a lot of us believe that he would have a relatively easy time in this election contest. Now, that said, the Republicans did recruit the former mayor of Stockton, or the current mayor of Stockton, and he has a compelling biography. And also Stockton, I think, is a microcosm of some of these big national trends that we have been seeing with a heavy shift of Latino and Hispanic voters to the Republican Party. Stockton borders, and the district does include a number of rural areas. And so voters in those areas, those parts of the district, may have turned out more. We won't know until we get the precinct analyses or the precinct returns. But it looks like a kind of classic district involved in a wave election where, one party does better, then everybody in that party does better. And even incumbents in the opposing party, have closer races, harder contests than they otherwise might have. And so the combination of a good candidate, a strong election for Republicans, and perhaps some of the realignment that we're seeing nationwide is playing out here in this district.
And Tal, for you, I know that you're probably someone who knows David Valadeo better than any of us do. Can you talk to us about this early lead that he has? It's about 10 percentage points and about 10,000 votes in California 22.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the bigger surprises of the night. Dave has historically, that margin has shrunk, and including in 2018 where he lost the seat. So usually a very close competitive race. The big question is those remaining ballots, of which, for example, there's 100,000 in Kern County, not all of which are in CA 22, but a portion that are. What is the profile of those ballots? In years past, very heavy Democratic. So you would see, even a few years ago when Congressman Costa was behind by a few percent on election night, you saw that lead erode, and then eventually he pulled ahead and was ultimately successful. What do those votes look like? In the last few cycles, and I think because of some of the narrative around lack of concern or concern with the election, Republicans have been holding those ballots back, which for anyone who works in a campaign is very scary, right? Like a ballot sitting on a kitchen counter makes you very nervous because lots of things happen and people forget. And if it doesn't get turned in, it may not get counted, right? So Republicans have been holding those ballots back, which means you may see some of those returns that would have really swayed towards Democrats be sort of tempered by the fact that a lot of Republicans are holding their ballots. And some of the folks that I've talked to had their ballots and then dropped them off at a polling place because they didn't trust the Postal Service. So maybe that sort of blunts some of the advantage that Democrats have traditionally had. So David Valadeo's lead in 22, CA 22, it may end up 6 or 8, but it probably won't remain 10. But this will really matter in some of those races that that you guys were mentioning before that are, within a point or two. What do those returns look like as they kind of get chunked out as the elections offices work through the ballots? Final thing I'll say would be that a lot of the rural communities, for whatever reason, they seem to stick around a little longer and kind of get the job done from a counting ballot standpoint. Sheer numbers obviously play into it, but the more urban parts, at least of the San Joaquin Valley, your Kern counties, your Fresno counties, it'll take them weeks, right? So is that a benefit for a particular candidate if there's more urban precincts as opposed to more rural? What does that mean for attempts to raise taxes, for instance? It may be as good as it's going to get for conservatives or Republicans now, and will continue to erode as the weeks go on and they finish counting in those counties.
Yeah, and so many of those districts, as we're looking at right now, are in the Central Valley or they're right outside of Los Angeles. That seems to be the majority of what we're seeing. Tim, for this seat that maybe we didn't pay quite as much attention to, maybe should have paid more attention to, with the Jim Costa district against Michael Maher. Or is this a surprise that Michael Maher is this close? I know he came close a few years back, and a lot of analysts thought it had swung more Democrat, but Jim Costa is a familiar name for many of us in Bakersfield, but redistricting has recently seen him up move towards more of the Fresno area. Is this a surprise to see that race as close as it is?
No, I don't think it's a surprise to see it as close as it is right now. What obviously Tal said, I think breaks a little bit more Costa's way as ballots begin to be counted and tallied. But certainly with how the race is currently, and probably a bigger chunk of no party preference or decline to state voters, breaking Maher's way. And if there's a significant amount of those, and as a professor said, with some of the realignment going on nationally, it could continue. Costa's not as familiar to Fresno voters, particularly as he is to other parts, or even to Tulare voters and that type of thing. I think Maher is certainly overperforming in this race, but there's still a lot of ballots to be counted in that area, and so we'll wait to see what the final tally holds there. But at this point, certainly it's cause for some hope for Fresno and Tulare County Republicans.
And Tal, what can you tell us about the Duarte Gray district? I mean, this was another one that we were watching very closely. It's one that's a supposedly Democrat-leaning district, but we have a Republican that's there. It's a tight race once again. We don't have him on, but Professor Nate Monroe, who we talked to as well, Adam Gray works in that same department up at Cape at UC Merced. There's some familiarity there, and I know that the emphasis was on young voters. What can we see this time around? Is this something where Gray looks like he's in a good position to take over that seat, or is Duarte in a better one?
Yeah, so two things. I do think there were low and mid propensity male voters that were probably, folks that vote in one of the last four elections. So not necessarily the people you would have spent a lot of time talking to. Many of them did show up this go around. And I think those folks did benefit Republicans overall and certainly nationally. In this particular seat, though, if you look at CA 22, so the Valadeo seat, and CA 13, the Duarte seat, I've kind of thought of them in a very similar fashion. It's looking like turnout was much higher in CA 13 as compared to CA 22. And I do think that's, from my perspective, as Californians get closer to the Bay Area, they change. Their voting tendencies change. So even just the fact that they're further north on the 99, I do think that will ultimately be beneficial to former Assemblyman Gray. I could see that race getting razor thin and even potentially him pulling ahead. Not for anything that Congressman Duarte is doing specifically, just really because the turnout was higher. Traditionally, the lower turnout in the South Valley has benefited Republicans, in many cases, Congressman Valadeo. So the higher turnout, some of it was lower and mid-propensity voters that I do think benefited Republicans. But overall, in those San Joaquin Valley seats, higher turnout is a good thing for Democrats pretty much across the board. And I think that will benefit Adam in the coming weeks as the counties work through those ballots.
And Professor, shifting things over to the State Assembly and State Senate, what are some interesting things that you've seen there as far as results that have been pouring in? Is there anything that suggests that there's a wave going one way or the other, or are we still waiting for a lot of these things to keep coming in?
So I'll talk about the state Senate district here in Stockton, which is former Congressman McNerney. Used to represent the district in Congress as a Democrat. was recruited to run in the state Senate district here. In terms of voter registration, in terms of voting history, again, it is a heavily Democratic district. And at this moment, McNerney is leading over Shoemaker, the Republican, by a couple hundred votes, which is mind-boggling at this point. I mean, just completely mind-boggling that the race is as close as it is at this moment in time. Now, for all the reasons that Tal and Tim have talked about, I would expect the Democratic vote or the Democratic percentage to grow as more ballots are counted. But it is still an incredibly close race in what should not have been any kind of contest at all. The assembly district, the same assembly district, is not close at all at this point. And there's a lot of overlap between those two districts. And so I tend to think of it, again, as this, where we are seeing Republicans, all other things being equal, do better in this cycle. We're seeing districts that have sizable Latino and Hispanic populations shifting. It's not, in some cases it's quite large, but it's enough to affect the dynamics of the contest so that Republicans are doing better as those people are increasingly voting Republican. And again, it does touch on some of the rural communities around the urban core of Stockton. And so in those rural communities, if turnout is higher, that's going to make the race closer than it otherwise would have been. But it just blows my mind that it's as close as it is at this moment in time.
And then rounding out our conversation, I want to keep everyone too long. For those, again, who are wondering why I'm sitting at this desk, we've had a number of technical problems, but we're still rolling through it. I want to touch on this assembly district down here, and that is Vince Fong against Ken Weir. It's really not supposed to be Vince Fong against Ken Weir, though. It was supposed to be Ken Weir going through, Vince Fong stepping aside. But there's been a lot of confusion over ballots this year. I've done my best, and I know the station's done our best, and every news outlet's done their best to say, hey, these are two different things. He doesn't want to win this. The Kern County Republican Party maybe not pushing forward that message as much as they could have to try and make that point heard. Not too many banners around Bakersfield. If you drive by, there's only a couple that say vote for Fong in Congress. Don't vote for him in Assembly. Vote for Ken Weir. But yet we're seeing a 17 percentage point lead right now for Vince Fong over Bakersfield City Councilman and Kern County Republican Party Chair Ken Weir. I'll go back to you, Professor, on this. What happens here if Vince Fong is elected to this office?
He has to make a choice if he's going to serve in Congress or if he's going to serve in the Assembly, although there's no question about which one he's going to pick. And so he will not be sworn in as an Assembly member, and we get to have another election to fill the vacant seat. And it'll happen sometime next year, hopefully earlier rather than later. But it's up to the county to decide. It's up to people down there to decide when that's going to happen. And then, will it be Weir? Will it be other people that throw their hats in? Dominguez has been talked up about running. It's a new contest, so candidates get to decide if they're going to run in the new contest, and voters get to decide among the new set of candidates who they're going to elect.
And Tim, going to you on this, just looking at the makeup of what that means in the Senate, in the State Assembly and the state legislature, how does it make it harder, again, for this Assembly district to continue to go without representation for, at least maybe another 3 or 4 months?
Well, given the numbers that are going to be in both state Senate and state Assembly, it doesn't necessarily change the policy that's going to be coming out of the legislature. One Republican Assembly seat, it doesn't give the Republicans a supermajority or break the Democrats supermajority or anything of that nature. So I think that in effect, pretty minimal, except the fact that, people locally will have a few months where they won't have anyone, specifically representing them, and, constituent service and some of the things that the other work that elected officials do. But there will be election, as the professor said, and I think that the makeup of the state legislature will largely look the numbers like it has over the last few years. There'll be might be a pickup in the state Senate and some other things, but it'll largely be the same as what we have come to expect out of the California legislature recently.
Tal, just ending with you on this. Do you expect this to be a contested contest? The professor threw a couple of different names around there too that may attempt to join in, because I know there's a lot of people that say, hey, if Ken Weir can't win as an assembly write-in back in the primary, and if he can't win, in this head-on race against Vince Fong, even though we know Vince Fong isn't running, are there going to be a couple other people that throw their name in? Is the Republican Party going to look at some other options, maybe not endorse? What do you expect to see candidate-wise in this race?
Yeah, and as the professor mentioned, Alex Dominguez, who's a local water attorney, I think a very credible young man and could be a great candidate. There were also a number of people that ran in that congressional race, including up the road in Tulare County, that could look at it as well. I do think it's a bit of a testament to Vince. I mean, he's managed to win 2 races on the same ballot. I think it's also an area for reasonable criticism for the county. My understanding is that because of the sort of rigidity of some of our election rules, they put on the ballot that they wouldn't update the ballot designation in the assembly seat. So Vince was listed as the assembly person for the seat that, ultimately Ken Weir was not successful in advancing in. And I do think that's a little bit problematic for voters, because it's routine for us in California to have folks running for a partial term and things like that, where you would hope that the county would sit down and say, all right, what's best for voters? Obviously, that's a congressman now. So I do think there was some sort of frustration should be frustration on the part of voters, because I think it was a little bit even more confusing than it was just naturally because of the timeline and the way things shook out. But yeah, I think it will be competitive, and we'll see. Ken Weir could very easily decide to run again. I don't think that would be helpful, especially if you have multiple Kern County candidates run in what would be a special election to fill the seat. It could open the door for someone up the road in Tulare County if that sort of Bakersfield vote gets split up and opens the door for someone outside the county.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm not going to hold my breath to hope that this saves. It should save. This computer. It's worked in the past. I've interviewed Adam Schiff on this, but who knows? Given the technology like we've had today, it says recording. We hope it continues to record. Thank you so much, all of you, for spending some time with me today. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.